So the first thing I'm going to do is with a clean and dry brush, I'm going to apply a coat of Neo-Megilp medium. Remember, Neo-Megilp is my preferred medium these days, and it's a fast dryer, so it's also, in addition to adding a layer of oil onto the surface, you know how I like to build up I like to use more oil as I move up in the layers, but also it's going to help with the paint drying overnight. And the palette that I'm using today is still the same one for the underpainting. So I'm just using Williamsburg Flake White, and Winsor Newton's Raw Umber. The reason I'm using those colors is because Winsor and Newton's Burnt Umber was a pretty fast dryer, but I kind of almost run out of it completely, so I decided to try a different one. So that's why I'm trying Raw Umber. Plus, some of my art friends use that for their underpaintings, and I kind of like the color. And Williamsburg Flake White, it just dries much faster than titanium white. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is to mix up a value scale just to have reference on my palette. And I saw some of the comments, so I just uploaded my the video on painting the hand in monochrome a couple minutes ago, so I'm seeing some of the comments. So one suggestion for another video would be to have it backlit. Double lighting, let me see. Yeah, double lighting, so warm and cool lighting. That'd be pretty cool. I like that idea. So I'm very much open to ideas for future paintings. I really want to guide you through the process of creating these paintings. So that's an interesting idea. I have an idea for a double portrait next time, and I'll share more information on that later. But yeah, I like the idea of the double lighting. So again, just getting a little value scale. See, that's a pretty neat color, Winsor Newton Raw Umber. I just want to make sure that I don't go off the camera shot. So I have the camera to the left of me. So I don't actually have the camera right in front of me. That way I can see with a little more clarity what's in front of me. One more. And you know something else I've been wondering? The way that I set up my palette, I don't know what to call it. I think I would call it like a value cloud, a palette value cloud. I have no idea what I would call it, but I'm curious as to what you would call it, the way that I arranged the value scale on the palette. I think someone said like a value web or something, like a spider's web. That'd be pretty cool. And I'm also curious, does anyone else use this type of arrangement on their palette after watching these videos? That'd be pretty neat. So let me know in the comments if you actually use this type of arrangement for your underpaintings or for when you're painting with color. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it one step at a time. Remember, the poster image that we developed before was just to differentiate the simple shapes of light and dark. I also saw in another one of the comments that when I was correcting the mandible or the chin, I thought it was the bony structure that I needed to angle down like this. And then one of you pointed out that it was probably that it wasn't the bony structure, maybe that her jaw was a little softer, I think. But in any case, thank you so much for pointing that out. I'm definitely going to look at this even more. But the way we're going to handle this is we're going to take each form at a time. So this form right here, this is the eye socket, the model's left eye. So we're going to use a variety of different brushes. And the reason that we're going to be painting this in monochrome to continue the underpainting is so that when we transition into color, we can build on top of a coherent structure. And I just find that I just find that my results are a little more appealing to me when I use this type of process. And again, back in the day when I was only uploading once a week, when I started introducing this technique, the classical approach, it became so much more manageable for me. It's not that I won't do alla prima ever again, of course I will, but this is just taking it one step at a time, so much easier. So let's explain what I'm doing. So the first thing I did was I looked for the darkest region, which is this portion of the eye socket as it curls, as it curls in here, it curls in and then forms the upper eyelid, but it does also create an accent mark. So that accent mark is right here. So as the forms angle away from the light, they become darker. See here, this is the furthest away from the light because it's literally sandwiched in between this area of the eye socket and the upper eyelid. And you can really create a very convincing image with monochrome without even putting in any colors. And I also noticed, I asked you all if you wanted to see me do a color study in a similar fashion as the value study that I did for this entire portrait. And I think that I'm going to do it. So once I get this underpainting all figured out in terms of the values and the structures, I'll go ahead and film the color study, because color study is actually something that I do, or I would like to do more often, I should say, for more elaborate paintings such as this one that has more than just head and shoulders. So don't worry, we'll film the color study. So notice how it's getting darker here as it's turning away from the light, and even darker than that, even though that's turning away from the light as well. So we're going to be judging each of these values. We're going to be evaluating each of these values based on the angle of which the plane makes with respect to the light source. For instance, this right here is a plane. Think of a plane as just a flat sheet and three-dimensional space. So imagine this is a single plane, that right there, and it has an angle with respect to the light source that is such that it is closer to being perpendicular. So I'm throwing a lot of words at you. I know that can be a little tough to think about form conceptually, but let me break it down for you. So this is a plane that's angle is very close to being perpendicular. This is a plane whose angle is very close to being parallel. So the angles that are parallel with respect to the light source are going to be in shadow. Perpendicular are going to be in full light. And that's all. And everything else falls in between. And all the in-between stuff will be your halftones. And your halftones will be gradated such as this. See how this is already starting to look like form and light. And about the brushes, I like to use synthetic rounds for this, just because it gives me more control. It's very similar to working with a graphite pencil. Just gives you a lot of control. And you really want to take your time with each form. Take as much time with each form as you're willing to allow yourself. Analyze each segment of the form, perpendicular to the light source, pretty close to perpendicular but not perpendicular, turning away from the light source right here, and then pretty much close to perpendicular to the light source again. And then as we move over here, this is going to be closer to parallel to the light source right there, that plane right there. And so it's that plane specific modeling that can be very complicated to a person that's just getting into painting or someone that's just getting into drawing. And that's why I think that it's so much more beneficial to create underpaintings like this, because imagine if we were trying to figure out flesh colors at the same time as we were trying to figure out the individual plane changes. That would be much more of a task. This, not so much. This is much more relaxing. But it's all relative. So now this plane is closer to parallel to the light source, this one, than this one, than the neighboring one. And then as we move down, this is going to be somewhere in between, but still a little closer to perpendicular to the light source. So it's going to be lighter. This is going to be lighter than that, but this plane is going to be lighter than this because this one, the angle is still closer to parallel. Whoops, made a mistake. This angle is closer to perpendicular. Now as we move on, we're going to encounter some difficulty with the photo reference that I kind of expected would happen. The photo reference, I mean, I did the best that I could with that picture, but when I took the picture, I didn't think that I would be painting the entire thing. I thought it would be for the portrait back when I was doing just head and shoulders demonstrations. So the face is a little overexposed in the photograph, which is actually very useful for the simplification of the forms. But now that we're getting into even more complicated forms, we're going to have to visualize information that isn't quite there. For instance, this whole area looks very flat in the photograph right here. I'm talking about this little triangle. But in fact, it would be getting slightly darker down here. Not because she's tired or anything, but just because anatomically, there is a subform down here beneath the lower eyelid. Who knows, it might be completely off, but I know that there is a little subform here. Of course, this needs to have a softer edge now. And as we move further away from the light, so again, something that's very complicated to see on the photograph, we know conceptually, this area here is turning away from the light, just because we noticed that the light angle, notice the highlight is there on the photo reference, I didn't put it in yet. But the light source is coming at this angle, like this. So we know that these planes here are going to be facing away from the light. Giving us a clean transition there. I'm going to go ahead and recharge the value scale on the palette. So form, or creating the illusion of form, is one of the most perplexing things I find in all of painting. Wouldn't you say? Making something appear realistic. Painting the illusion of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional surface. It is very perplexing to think about that. It's almost like a magic trick. But in reality, it's much more up to the conceptual understanding that you have of form. And so I'm gonna show you what I mean. So right here with the shape for the upper eyelid, we deduced that this area here was most perpendicular to the light source, right there. So again, it is not just a flat sheet anymore. That is how we conceptualized it, but now it's going to have a very particular form. So it's kind of like a little tiny triangle and starts to scatter light around. So we're going to look at each segment for this eye and really break it down into what creates the illusion of form, what will make this look like it's emerging right out of the panel. It's not in the details. Now, there is a plane change here for the lower eyelid that's going to need to be indicated. So this is going to take some little tiny brushes, but I think this is the only tiny brush I have at the moment that can do this kind of thing, so bear with me here. So the first thing I'm going to do for the lower eyelid is solidify this shape a little better. So value and edge quality is going to be kind of one of the more important aspects of creating the illusion of form. For instance, the lower eyelid physically is just a much sharper edge. So some edges are soft because of the way that the form is turning, such as these little edges here. This is a sharper edge just because the light is just catching right onto the lower eyelid. See that? Now we have that sharper edge. Now where we're going to run into some trouble between the two eyes is in the amount of sclera that's showing. I don't know if it's distortion, but there's a little bit of light here in the sclera, but it doesn't communicate well with the other eye. So here's where I'm going to have to edit a little bit from the photograph. So a little bit of light here. And I'm editing it because I know the model pretty well. I know that the model's eyes aren't going to... I know that the model's eyes are looking in the same position. And again, I like to paint people that I know. Family members, friends, people that I've met in art groups. That's just how I like to do it. I don't like to paint photographs of celebrities or things like that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you like to do, then do it. Everything is beautiful, everything is valid. a little darker here under the eyelid. I'm having trouble figuring out why that's so dark. That could be makeup. But if it is, it's going to break away from the form a little bit, but that's alright. So even though I didn't know this was makeup in the beginning, just the fact that I'm observing things in terms of their relative plane, the angle of their plane with respect to the light, made me notice that this was way too dark to be believable. And it actually, I think it's makeup. And if it isn't, it's just the lower eyelashes. Certain things have different local value changes, such as the lips. So one of the reasons I like to use burnt umber or raw umber in general is just because it doesn't get as dark, and I like to compress the value range in the underpainting. I like to do as much as I can with a compressed value range before I try to jump in there with the entire value range. A little darker here. So we're going to sharpen this edge here, soften these edges over there. And that should help with the effect of the light shimmering on here. Now this is a little bit more smooth than I have it. I'm just trying to smoothen that out. And then of course this whole area is now one unified dark, whereas in life it would actually be much darker here as the eye starts to curve into the eye socket, but that's okay. It's actually alright to group together some of the darks. Alright, so now let's move on to the glabella. So it's going to get a little darker here as the plane, the angle of the plane that we're painting is angling further away from the light source. So again, this is really why I was emphasizing the importance of a clean distinction between light and dark. Just because it makes this stage so much more simple. Let's use a bigger brush, slightly bigger. And it's okay if we over model any one section in the underpainting. It's quite alright. We will, of course, go over this with color and make it even more precise. So I'm just going to eliminate some glare. So it gets lighter up here as we work our way towards the top of the glabella, right around the corner. The eyebrows. Darker again over here. And of course there's going to be a cleaner transition into the concavity of the eye socket, meaning that this edge needs to be softer. So that plane is pretty dark, so the angle is closer to parallel than this one. Even though technically, shouldn't they be the same? I don't know. I'm thinking that these two planes should be the same. Don't know why this one appears darker. I'm not sure, to be honest, but I'm going to go ahead and paint what I know. So these planes should be at about the same angle. You know how we have bilateral symmetry. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and darken this little transition here, or at least make the edge a little softer. So we're gonna be working both of the eyes at the same time. So again, right here, plane change, that's getting a little closer to parallel. So it's getting darker. Darker relative to this. All of the value changes are being made relative to the surrounding shapes. So here's another plane change. That is a little closer to being parallel to the light source than that one. But then as we move towards the top side of the tear duct, it's going to get lighter, closer to perpendicular to the light source. And a little bit lighter here for this little crest of light for the nasal bone. And then just like we had here, it's very hard to see on the photo reference, but would be a little bit darker here. Again, not because the model's tired, but because anatomically there's a little structure right here beneath the lower eyelid. And then for the eyelid, the upper eyelid, it's going to get darker around here because this plane is angling away from the light. And then of course it'll get lighter towards this area. But then again, that's in the generic. So now we're going to make the planes even more specific, meaning the shape of the light isn't just a flat rectangle anymore. In fact, it's just a tiny little spot, it appears. Another tiny little triangle there. Then there's a little bit of a ripple there in the upper eyelid. Then a little spot of light there. So the eyebrow just has a little softer edge here. So I know that this video is getting kind of long, so I think this one is going to focus on the eyes in particular. So we're going to push the eyes as much as possible. Then tomorrow, we'll get into the nose and mouth in terms of their structures. So here's the structure for the lower eyelid. And I want to make sure that this portion communicates with this portion in terms of the swoop of this angle here. It's a little, imagine like, I don't know, sunglasses or something. And what I mean is this specific angle right there. See that? I'm carving that in. I want this angle to be not mirrored, not reflected, but communicative to this angle. Whereas, since the model is in 3/4, we're seeing less of this eye right here. So this angle would actually be a little closer to 90 degrees. Whereas this one would be angled slightly down, closer to being an acute angle. So again, making something appear realistic is not just about the values. Now the values play an important role, but also just the three-dimensionality of the shapes communicating to one another. A little darker here. And we want there to be a communication between this shape and this shape, meaning the sclera on this side and the sclera on that side. So that is, I want this shape of the sclera. Sorry, my hand's kind of shaky. Shouldn't have drank that coffee. So this shape for the sclera needs to be the same as this shape. They're pretty close. And now, of course, there's a little bit of light on the top plane of the lower eyelid here. Right about there. Takes kind of a steady hand, but if you don't have a steady hand, like my hand isn't really that steady, you can always use something like this is called a maul stick, or just a wooden dowel. So we're going to get very precise here. Whoops. There we go. So if your hand gets a little shaky, it's okay. Mine does too. There we go. So now I'm going to continue the dark shape all the way through here with just a raw umber. Try to make sure that these sides communicate with one another. And then again, I think this is probably some of the trickiest stuff in all of painting, at least in my opinion. Now, after adding a few more value transitions, I think the next thing I want to do for the eyes is just to, with a clean, dry, synthetic brush, just soften some of these transitions here. So this, I think I'm going to dedicate this video to the eyes. the structure of the eyes in monochrome. I think I'm gonna do another one on the nose itself. Hope that sounds interesting to you. Let's try to break each feature down into the most simple elements we possibly can. And remember, developing form, the illusion of form, can be pretty tricky. But once you understand the concepts, it's not so bad. And I'm certainly still learning. So let's soften this little transition just a little bit. Alright, so I think that'll be it for the underpainting of the eyes in monochrome. I really hope that this video helps you out. And of course, I wish you the best in all of your artwork. And tomorrow we'll move our way down to the nose. And who knows, I think we'll spend the entire video on the development of the nose. Usually in my portrait painting demonstrations, my older ones, I would show you maybe like 4 or 5 minutes of me working out the nose and then have to go into cutscenes just because how long it takes. So I decided I'm going to break it down for you and spend an entire video on this nose, even if it takes 20 or 30 minutes or something like that.